Welcome to What Next? Leadership Conversations for a Better Future from the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership in partnership with Investec. This series is hosted by Lindsay Hooper and Mark Kahn.
Hello and welcome to What Next? Leadership Conversations for a Better Future, where we explore how leaders can help build future-fit economies. I'm Lindsay Hooper, Chief Executive at the University of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership.
And I'm Mark Kahn, Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer at Investec. Together, we'll bring fresh perspectives, provocative questions, and conversations with leaders who are shaping the future of markets, business, and society.
Today we're taking a more reflective turn, exploring why meaning feels in short supply for many people and why that matters for leadership. And most importantly, we want to focus on what leaders can actually do about it. We'll look at how meaning gets distorted, what authentic purpose looks like, and how small human acts, connection, empathy, belonging can help rebuild it. To explore this, we're joined by Sudhanshu Palsule, who's an educator, a leadership thinker, and an author whose work focuses on human-centred leadership in times of complexity. We're also joined by Richard Springer, who's a community leader. He serves as the rector at St George in the East and works on issues of inclusion, faith and social justice in East London. We're also joined by my colleague here at CISL, Gillian Secrett, who heads up our work on leadership and culture.
So welcome, everybody. It's a real pleasure to have you. I mean, we are filled in this room with so-called experts on the meaning of life, which is, in many respects, the most elusive of questions. But in all seriousness, it really is that, as Lindsay said, really trying to have some kind of a deeper appreciation of how is it going in the world when it comes to meaning, and what do we need to be doing more with in this regard, given that it seems as if meaning is disappearing from so many aspects of our life. So it'd be interesting to hear from all three of you what brings you into the work at a personal level. And perhaps, Richard, we could start with you.
I think there are two things to say as to why I end up sitting here. The first thing is, as someone who's brought up as a working class black British boy, I'm struck by my parents' heritage is in Barbados, and the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, talks about climate activism as a kind of new colonial problem. And so at a very personal level, I'm interested to explore that. I'm no expert on that, but that's a personal draw. And then in terms of the work that I do in the East End of London, I am struck in an area where we're doing a lot of community organising by the kinds of campaigns that people say they want to drive. And despite the climate crisis looming over us everywhere and everyone being very clear that it's a crisis, it doesn't come up as the pressing issue for people time and time again. It's affordable housing, quality of life, perhaps air pollution, but that's typically connected to their children's experience of life rather than the crisis per se. So I'm curious as to how that can change.
Sudhanshu?
I'm struck by the lack of coherence that seems to be gaining more and more momentum around us. At the individual level, I'm sensing more and more a sense of helplessness, anxiety, and even a little cynicism among a lot of people, especially the young people. And at the collective level, the fragmentation that is just gaining momentum too. At the organizational level, where I spend a lot of my time working, we just seem to be seeing more and more helpless agents of market capitalism with just heading off in all directions and a lack of coherence abounding there too. And the questions that I then raise to myself and to the people that are willing to listen to me is the questions are about meaning and purpose and about the role of the human being in the middle of all this, and our relationship with nature, which is one part of the problem, and our relationships with each other in a world that is getting increasingly fractured by the day.
Gillian?
Well, I'm struck by the importance of leadership in this and how leaders and individuals and the space in which they operate is so important in terms of driving the sustainability agenda and bringing about the future that we need. And that all goes down to how individuals act and what they do, they create the space around them for others to act.
I want to test an assumption, which in some ways this whole conversation is premised on. Does meaning matter at a human level? Is it a luxury? Or is it a really fundamental human impetus? And certainly a lot of the very senior leaders that I work with who absolutely recognize that whole market dynamic, I think many feel trapped in a system that they have very little control over and they can't shift norms. But I get this real sense that they want to be part of something better. They want to be building something better to have a greater, higher level of meaning than what their transactional work requires them to do. So I just want to test, is that just me, naively hoping that exists? Do you think that there is a human need for meaning?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. I would say that as a priest, but I think it's the case for it's a human matter. I think perhaps people don't know how to get to it rather than a lack of desire for it. I think that crosses all kinds of bounds, and in particular, importantly for me and where I am, socioeconomic bounds. People seek meaning in pretty much the same ways. I'm always struck by people who turn up early on a cold, wet Sunday morning for church. They're seeking something. They don't have to be there. And they're reaching for something in their diversity. So absolutely, I think my church and my parish right across the world, there is that desire. Yeah.
And I'm assuming from your comment just now, Sudhanshu, that you would echo that. The quest for meaning was clearly core to your view there.
Yeah, I agree. I think the meaning is core to the human brain. It's part of our evolutionary lineage. And at some point, as the human brain developed and evolved into what we recognize as the brain we have today, the need for meaning and purpose became endemic to it. And in there lies both a gift and a burden. A gift because it just heightens our sense of consciousness, our presence on the earth, our kinship with each other. On the other hand, the lack of it becomes a huge burden. And Richard, as you'll agree, you can have everything in the world that you desire, but when there's no meaning, there is literally nothing. And that's the burden that we see in all of us and we bear. That's our cross to bear.
When I look at the world today, the kind of meaning that we see the average person pick up is based on having the right brands. And it's really meaningful if I've got the right brand and the right car and, I've got the right name in the right place. So people seem to derive meaning in a way that is not positive for society. And certainly we see that on the environmental scale, often negative for the environment. So I'd like to just put on the table, yes, we're meaning-making creatures, but it seems as if very often the meaning that we create for ourselves is curiously self-destructive for society. And I would even be provocative, Richard, when it comes to religious meaning, where we see religious ideologies used in incredibly destructive ways. And at the same time, the same meaning set, same religious ideology brings forth great kindness and so much good in the world.
Okay, so how can that desire for meaning be met?
It's such an important point that we need to bottom this out a little bit. And meaning, when we use the word, we think we're all in agreement about what the word means, but we're not, because someone can find meaning from being part of a fragmented reality in which they're taught to hate another community. Someone can find meaning in just buying up a whole bunch of things, as you were saying. And so we've got to figure out what we mean by meaning. And for me, real meaning is about wholeness. Real meaning is about almost fulfilling a deep longing that all human beings have for the whole. And that includes nature, it includes communities. But in the absence of that, everything becomes a distraction that we use to fill that vacuum in. So consumption becomes a distraction, or my belonging to a particular group that hates another group provides a false identity that fills that vacuum again. So I think we need to be careful about how we use the word meaning. You're absolutely right, Mark, because meaning can be derived from a whole bunch of things, including distraction and consumption, which is not what we are talking about.
So let me pick that up. So you put forward this notion of belonging, and I think Sudhanshu's captured something important here. I think that, and I'm going to be rather provocative here, we should really look carefully at the way organizations and institutions and governments use meaning narratives to manipulate individuals toward their own ends. And those ends are not necessarily positive in the way Sudhanshu just referred. Now, I'm going to push the boundary here and say, I would hazard something of a guess that the vast majority of purpose and culture narratives of companies is a form of sort of performative managerialism, which is a kind of ruse to get people to feel like they belong, to your point, Lindsay, a sense of belonging in this company. We're doing good in the world. But actually, this is a ruse of sorts. I'm being very provocative here, to get people to work in ways that they sacrifice, in Sudhanshu's words, really the meaning of why they're there, in service to the market economy aims. So that's first. And then I'm going to really push here, Richard. But I would say we could probably accuse religious institutions of the same thing, certainly historically. Not all religious institutions, and not all of history, and not all of companies, and not all of life. But for my part, too often and too many. Should we not call it out? Because if we really want to talk about a sustainable future, we are going to have to solve this phenomena in which we as human beings do this to each other. Take a liberty with the fact that we're a meaning-making animal to manipulate us. Sorry.
That is a great provocation, and I'd really like to take that forward I suppose, in two ways. You challenge their corporates, and in a way, can corporate purpose ever really be authentic in market economies? I'm very keen to pick that up. But you also, of course, challenged religions too, but I'd like to pick that up from a slightly different angle. I'd rather kind of flip it and say, okay, can corporates ever really have a true purpose that is authentic and give a sense of meaning when they work in market economies? And on the other hand, I'm really interested in, will we enable grassroots movement and community engagement, whether or not religious entities are involved in that? I'm just really interested both from a citizen perspective and a corporate institutional perspective. Richard, will we see bottom-up grassroots movements from citizens? You opened with, no. But what would it take to really unleash that desire, that sense of human appetite for meaning in ways that are good for citizens themselves and communities?
Yeah, I think there has to be some rules around what that engagement looks like, some kind of methodology that keeps everybody accountable to one another if it's going to work. So I think that's crucial. And obviously, then the argument begins, well, what are the rules? But there needs to be some. And I think it is possible, but the phrase that is repeated in the organising circles I'm in is slow and patient work. These are not words that are typically associated with dealing with the climate crisis or sustainability. But it feels crucial that if we want to engage broad-based coalitions, so people of, for my part, all faiths and none, if you want to create a world in which they're all working, they're co-conspiring to do something about something that they all agree they care about, then that's going to take time because of the fragmented society that we've allowed to, in some ways, drift, but certainly has accelerated and almost feels out of control.
Are there things that need to be stopped as well? Are there things that actually are really unhelpful?
You need nuance. So I think as soon as we talk about groups of people, you turn off all the people. But it's difficult not to talk about groups of people if you want to have a conversation. But it's very difficult to do. And I think there are small frontline organizations that have the nimbleness to do this because they care about a small geographical area, essentially. So there's a level of nuance that's possible. But I think if we are unable to think about, well, what is it that drives this devout religious individual to behave in these very committed ways? If we're not interested to understand what that is, we will never win their participation.
Do you mean deep market segmentation in the way that marketing firms do?
Oh, touche. That was...
Yeah, perhaps. But I mean, this is the risk. I'm not here to defend this. This is the risk of it. There has to be some equalizing of the conversation. So the retort needs to be allowed, and the person receiving the retort has to be up for the agitation. And that's why you need rules to govern the engagement.
When you said a moment ago, what really motivates devout people, and we need to understand that. Can you articulate something for us there?
What I mean is that I think change comes about slowly, and people move. There is progression within the movement, within any kind of movement. So people need to experience the issue inside of their lives. So what is going on inside of my life that connects to this, not what is important outside of my life that I have to shift my thinking to understand. We need to begin inside their experience. If this person says, my experience is that I'm a low-wage worker and I'm committed voluntarily the rest of my time to raising my kids and being in my church or my mosque or my synagogue, these are the things that matter to me. We can't say to that person, you have to find time to make this thing matter. We have to understand, well, what's driving that? I think for this issue, the links are there. If I, as a leader in my neighborhood, take care to understand where those links are, I think then people do engage. We've seen it in various campaigns. Probably the most obvious and largest one is the Living Wage campaign. The Living Wage Foundation starts in a very small place with a group of cleaners and becomes, something that football clubs sign up to. But that takes that interest in what's going on inside someone's life for them to connect.
Of course, organisations, corporations are just groups of people in a way. They're communities that working within certain rules, and the individuals and leaders within them operate within, business construct at work, and they may also be active citizens in a whole range of issues outside of work. Sudhanshu and Gillian, your professional lives, your work is in these domains. And I'm interested to come back to this provocation that Mark laid out earlier around corporate purpose. And is this really a thing? You've had time now for your strong rebuttal if you disagree. I'm interested in your response to that provocation.
So I think the problem is not with the word purpose, it's how it manifests itself and what we allow it to become. And then it becomes a tool of market capitalism for private organizations, 100%. I think it's for this reason that when I was doing some research for the book that we wrote on purpose, it soon became apparent that purpose without empathy is like a loose cannon. I mean, the worst dictators in the world, the worst human beings that we've known have had an extraordinarily clear sense of purpose. So it's not that purpose by itself is good. Purpose can be used in every which way. But when purpose has empathy on the other side, and I'm using the word empathy for want of a better one, I could use compassion. That's another word I would love to use. The question then is, what can leadership do about it?
So you would imagine that if you look at all the faith ideologies, ultimately they are based in some kind of empathetic and compassionate reach out beyond the self-interest and connecting to others. Surely then we wouldn't be in such a terrible state because we've had centuries, if not thousands of years of faith, and it doesn't seem to be working, Richard.
I apologise, Mark. I think we use the phrase self-interest in my church as well. It's controversial to use because people say, well, I'm not selfish. We're not supposed to be selfish. But I obviously see self-interest as a very different thing. And where people share space, particularly, self-interest gets really interesting, particularly across difference, because people actually have the same landlord. And so self-interest is crucial. And I think self-interest actually leads to compassion and empathy where people share space, because I think of the longing that we've been hearing about because of that almost intangible thing that's going on maybe in a soul or somewhere in the system of a human being that wants to connect with the other person, that doesn't care what they look like. It's another human being. I want to relate to this person. And so we say self-interest is crucial. We talk about the self-interest of Jesus. Jesus is something he's got to get on with. So I think self-interest is really, really important to this. And I think part of the reason why it can go wrong is that self-interest can become something that people imagine is separate to what they're doing in community. So the example I always think of in relation to the climate crisis is the story of protesters on top of trains stopping low-wage workers getting to work. You've lost what self-interest is about. It's not led to empathy. You've missed your target and you've spoiled your cause. And that's partly because those people don't share space with these people. They don't know these cleaners and these security guards, so it doesn't matter to them. And there's this disconnection. It's got to be, for me, geographical. As a Christian, as a kind of amateur theologian, it's got to be geographical. That's what I think religion ultimately is about. I actually agree. It's not much of a provocation to me because I actually agree with you, Mark, that it hasn't worked because there is this idea that if we're essentially nice, it'll all be all right. But that's not what human beings are all about. Human beings aren't here to be nice. They are driven by self-interest all the time. And the quicker we get comfortable with that, the more effective we'll be.
Rather than kind of trying to take a polarised, are we optimistic, pessimistic, I'm interested in what's possible. And Richard, you've mapped out a few, I suppose, pragmatic areas. This importance of sharing space, meeting people where they are, recognising that people need to have a stake and a vested interest themselves rather than expecting people to be self-sacrificing, and being willing to have open, candid conversations and needing rules and boundaries to ensure things can happen. Well, what more? What's the sense of possible? And I'm going to come back to you, Sudhanshu, because you use the language of unsolvable, I think, or impossible in the context of capitalist markets. In light of that, where's the solution space? Where is the sense of what's practical in real terms?
I'm going to build on what Richard said, and I love the way you described this, Richard. We don't meet people where they are. We don't understand those worlds they inhabit. And we don't really have those conversations with each other because we don't understand each other at all. And I think for me, the problem is becoming even more intense in today's world where there's so much distraction, and social media and technology are playing a huge role in this, where we simply don't have the time or the interest in understanding each other, the spaces that the other occupies, which are different from the spaces I occupy, unless I make the effort to truly understand those spaces and come together in a real conversation, in a real dialogue where meaning emerges between us. Not my meaning, not your meaning, but the meaning comes at the interface where you and I start interacting with each other. If we are prepared to do that, then it becomes a solvable problem. If you take a look at where the current geopolitical situation stands, there is simply no conversation happening because there's no interest in each other's perspectives. And I think from that point of view, I think the first step that we can all take, whether it is at the political level or at the level of the university or the level of the private sector, is to deeply, deeply go into the real meaning of why are we here? Why are we doing what we are doing? And it's to bring that deep sense of awareness into the work that we do as leaders and bring that in service of that conversation, the dialogue, the probing, the understanding the other. When we use the word understanding, to me, when you understand the other, it's literally to stand under the other. We're not prepared to do that. We're not prepared to hold our point of view long enough to hear the voice of another. We don't want to do that. And I think I see change happening at a very, very fundamental level, at this level. And if we can bring this into the way we bring up our children, if families can start having these conversations with their children, for example, in the children in the family, we need to build change from there onwards. Otherwise, I do not think that the way we are tackling the problem at this moment in time is going to lead to any substantial change. I think we need to bring some change about in ourselves first, recognizing that we are the problem. You stop blaming the other for the problem, but we are the problem, and then bring about that change in the generations to come. Yes, it's a long haul.
Gillian, how confident are you that we've got the leadership that we need for a better future? Is there reason for optimism?
I think there is reason for optimism, but we have some really challenging situations out there and some very challenging role models that the younger generation are seeing taking effect and having impact. Not the impact necessary that we want to have, but they're seeing things are getting done. And I think we're working in that context at the moment, but there are some really positive areas of leadership taking place. And I think understanding that the fact that many leaders do want to be able to create the right space for the people around them in their organizations to do their best work, to allow the space to build the connectivity and the community that Sudhanshu's alluding to, so that they can each take accountability to deliver what's required in that organization and beyond. And it's really about those organizations who are finding that they're working to deliver success around thinking about the future and whatever it is they're doing, whether it's delivering products and services or whether it's, building infrastructure. If they can see a way of doing this in a sustainable way and thinking forward about this opportunity, creating a purpose around that because they know they're doing work that's going to serve society as a whole whilst it's serving the shareholders. People in the organisation can really get around that and understand it and feel that they're in a place where they have meaning and purpose, but they're also delivering a successful role in their job.
At the outset of this conversation, when you introduced yourself, said why you were in this conversation, I think you were quoting Mia Motley, was it? And I'm just interested in your purpose of being there and how that concern, that motivation for you ties into any of this conversation.
I think regardless of whatever Mia Motley's politics are, she does something really important, which is to offer a narrative which lots of people can join in with and test and poke and have a look at. I think that's the genius of her on this issue.
Absolutely.
I think that's crucial to this conversation that in terms of what leaders need to be doing is can you craft a narrative that allows a broad-based group of people to engage, and not a narrative that's complete. It must be unresolved, because then you have to co-conspire. That's got to be in the DNA of it. But you need this big picture. And that is the role of a leader, to provide that, whether it's in a corporation or a community centre or a school or wherever it might be, or in a family.
I love that sense of a narrative that's not complete, so people can see their role within it. I love that.
Yes. I'm reminded of the cleaner at the NASA station before they put the rocket on the moon saying, I'm sweeping up because I'm putting a rocket on the moon. He understands the narrative, his part in it.
I think, we've come a little bit to the end of our time together. So moving towards some closing thoughts. From your points of view, what are the important insights that leaders need to sit with, and also listeners?
I think I would say this idea of things being necessarily unresolved is important. Engaging people inside of their experience is crucial. And I think the one thing that I haven't said that I'd love to say is that figuring out what the winnable actions are on this issue is also important. Because once people get a taste for winning, it's like a sports team. They keep on winning, and they think bigger. And so it becomes more manageable. So what is that beyond the very, very individual actions that everybody knows they should take, but actually don't make a real difference? And everybody also knows that. What is it that we might collectively do in a city or a town or a street that's winnable?
I love that. And it also reminds me, the narrative around the long arc of history bending towards progress, that it bends because people lean in and make it bend. It doesn't just happen by itself. And you're like, wow, that happened. But it's also not a silver bullet solution. It's not we're transitioning from state A to state B and everything will be solved there. Every generation will fight their own battle. Each community will be fighting about the things that they care about. So this sense that it's ongoing, but it does require that leaning in, and that requires you to be focused on what are the winnable battles. So I really like the way you framed that. Thank you.
I would just like to tell people, and that includes all of us, stop being so darn clever about things. Our heads are filled with theories, concepts, ideologies, opinions, assumptions, beliefs, that we just operate through that screen that we've created. And in a world which is getting even more dismantled by digital technology, This noise is reaching intense proportions. Stop being so darn clever. Reach into the depths of who you are. Find out what it means to be human. Find out what it means to be truly connected to everything that is around you, and see the difference in what that does to you. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you show up. It changes the way you relate to things. Give it a shot. That's my 2 penny worth.
Thank you. Gillian?
Well, I would encourage leadership to really hear what Sudhanshu is saying there and to find ways in their leadership to help people to find that wholeness, to join the dots, to connect with others, to create the spaces where they can connect with others in a meaningful way. Yes, to get the work done. Yes, to take accountability. Yes, to deliver for society. But to make sure in a leadership role that that understanding of connectivity and how we can deliver a sustainable future together is actually known and understood, and those important steps to take us there. So that would be my sense, is to really take on that leadership role to create spaces for people to connect and take accountability.
And that encouragement, what I hope, is basically quiet our cleverness, which is a phrase that Elspeth Donovan, one of our former colleagues, used to use a lot and very powerfully. I think you summed up brilliantly why that is so important, a discipline and a practice for us. So I personally took that on board. Thank you so much for joining us. That was an incredibly rich and deep conversation. Some of the takeaways that I'm sitting with are that meaning is a human need. It's not a luxury, and leaders will ignore it at their peril. It's also clear that purpose must be authentic. People can see through performative approaches. It's clear that community matters, and we build meaning when people feel seen and part of something. And also that leadership, in part, is the craft of enabling others, creating the conditions for purpose, not just dictating it. Thank you very much for joining us. Please do join us next time for What Next? Leadership Conversations for a Better Future.
This show is presented by Lindsay Hooper, Chief Executive of CISL, and Mark Kahn, Investec's Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer. The producers are Carl Homer of Cambridge TV and Alexa Selwood. The executive producer is Gillian Secrett, and it's produced in partnership with Investec. Thank you for listening. For more episodes, subscribe on any major podcast platform or visit the Leadership Hub on the CISL website or Investec Focus. You'll find the address in the show notes. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the contributors at the time of recording and do not necessarily represent the views of CISL, the University of Cambridge, or Investec, and should not be taken as advice or recommendations.